Tonight is the fourth lesson of Advice from the Rebbe, where we are going through various areas of life and seeing the Torah's perspective through the lens of the Rebbe and the Rebbe's vision, which is gleaned from the Rebbe's teachings, primarily correspondence and videos that we have, whether of people sharing their own stories or videos of the Rebbe. Tonight, we will discuss emotional health, mental health, which is a very important topic, and it's one that is important for everyone. But just to begin with a story, obviously a joke, there are two psychologists. They went to medical school together, and they meet after 40 years. And one of them, Jack, is looks old. His face looks through. He went through a lot, and his mannerisms. He looks so worn out. Whereas his friend Max looks like a young 60, 70-year-old. He looks like he's ready to take on the world. And Jack turns to Max and says, "I don't understand. After so many years of being a psychiatrist, of listening to everyone's problems, of dealing with everyone's situations, how can you not look worn out? How do you look so fresh?" And Max turns to Jack and says, "What? You listen?" I say another story of three psychologists who are sitting together, and they're all talking about their deepest, darkest secrets. And they all say, we're all going to share one secret. One, blanking, just a minute. One psychologist says to his group of friends, he says, "You know what? I'll get to it. Oh. All right." He says, so one psychologist shares to the other one. He says, "You know what? I got a secret that I never told everyone. I often, I hear so many kvetching and so much, I often think of just getting rid of all my patients. I dream about it." And the other guy says, "You know what? My deepest, darkest secret is that I've dreamt of doing something harmful to each one of my patients throughout the 40 years. They turn to the third psychiatrist, and he smiles to himself and he says, "My biggest problem is that no matter how much I try, I can't keep a secret." All right. So we'll get into tonight. What we're going to discuss tonight is the Rebbe's view on emotional health and mental health. Now, I just want to preface with the idea that obviously, in general, especially when it comes to serious clinical cases, people should enlist the help of medical professionals. And I'm not giving any medical advice here. But it's important to see the Rebbe's view on life, especially in this important area in life. And as we discussed in prior weeks, but specifically last week, the idea where the fusion between the physical and the spiritual, the fusion between the body and soul, isn't something that each one operates on its own operating spectrum, but rather they operate together. And it's only with having complete health in one can you have complete health in the other. They each complement each other, and really not just complement, but they work hand in hand with each other. And there's no difference when it comes to mental health, emotional health. It's this idea where the Rebbe's advice was really all inclusive. It was both areas, even when it came, especially when it came to mental health and emotional health. It was both areas in life where the Rebbe would advise people to strengthen their spiritual well-being as well as their physical well-being. And as we'll soon see in some of the letters. Now, when it came to seeking the Rebbe's advice, as we saw last week, thousands of people every single year, and hundreds of people every day would seek the Rebbe's advice in various areas. And by and large, many of the letters, of the queries, of the questions, of the requests that came in were pertaining to health and mental health, or emotional health, perhaps even more than physical health. You see, as time goes on, we're, in the free world, nowadays people have more than they had in the shtetl. More people have more than probably any other time throughout history. Yet we don't see that translating necessarily into a true, inherent, essential sense of joy, of happiness, of peace, and harmony at heart. We don't see it necessarily. The more things people have, the more peaceful they are at heart, and perhaps quite the contrary. And so the more time goes on, the more people sought the Rebbe's advice in these things, which we will see throughout the letters and videos that we will go through tonight. Now, when it comes to psychology, right? What's the imagination that what's the image that comes into our minds? Perhaps you can say the image that comes into our minds, right, is the couch, is the idea where someone comes to the therapist, the counselor, their psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever it is, and the idea is there's a problem. There are various problems. Let's find the root core of the issue. Let's focus on that core issue. Let's talk about it. Let's share our feelings about it. Let's share our deepest, darkest feelings about whatever the concern is, get to the core of it, analyze that core. So we're fixating on the issue, we're fixating on and talking about the concern, the problem, getting to the root core of the problem. And that is definitely an important approach. It's an important approach, and it's important to talk about things. And perhaps nowadays, and I've seen some studies about it, one of the bigger problems that we have nowadays with mental health is the idea that people don't have real friends. And so, perhaps that's a reason why, we have to pay people to listen to us, where in days of old, people had friends to talk to. People were more focused, people were more giving of their time for other people. And so they were able to express themselves better. And so we didn't have to pay people to listen to us. And listening to us and speaking our hearts is a very important component. And I'm going to, before we get into the text, before we get into the letters, I just want to give a slight introduction which shows this theme, this idea. The Talmud focuses on the verse from Proverbs. The verse says, and it's not in our textbooks, but the verse says, Daiga belev ish yashchana. Loosely translated is when someone has a worry in their heart, they should quash it, right? Which definitely does not sound like modern psychology. But the Talmud has a very interesting take on this verse. The Talmud says as follows, Daiga belev ish, when one has a worry in their heart, what does the word yashchena, that fourth word, the actionable word, yashchena, which we translated loosely meaning to quash, what does that word mean? How do you read that word? And when we say how do they read that word, it's something we've discussed on multiple courses in the past. How do you read that word means, in Hebrew, the vowels are not letters. The vowels are a series of dots, some sort of Morse code around the letters of this word. So when you have any word, you have the letters, and then you have the vowels. Take, for example, the word bread, right? There's the consonants and there's the vowels. The consonants are BRD. BRD with any other vowels can be a different word, right? BRD, those consonants can be bread, beard, bird, broad, right? It can board, the other board. I'm sure there's a third word somewhere. So those consonants can mean various words. Now, in English, when you type out a word, you're going to have the vowels within the letters. You can't just switch around vowels. But in Hebrew, the vowels are interchangeable. And so the Talmud focuses on this word, yashchena. And the Talmud has two opinions. There's the opinion of the sage, Rab Ami, and there's the opinion of the sage, Rav Asi. So let's not get confused with the two. There's Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. We'll get to Rabbi Ami's opinion in a moment. There's Rabbi Asi's opinion. Rabbi Asi says, let's read the words Yesichana. Daiga belev ish, when there's a worry in one's heart, Yesichana. What does the word Yesichana mean? Yesichana, he should talk it over with others. Talk. Find a psychologist, find a therapist, find a counselor, find a friend. Talk it over with others, talk your issue, share what's on your heart. And the Talmud relates that you gain three benefits from talking it over with other people. The first one is when you talk something over, when you share something, it translates it from a deep feeling, the unknown, to clarifying what the problem is. You're able to go ahead and that feeling of anxiety, of nervousness, of uncertainty, and you go ahead and you share that with someone else. You talk about it with someone else. Just by talking about it, you can narrow it down to what the problem actually is. Secondly, the Talmud says, you get a clarity. Perhaps it's connected to that, but you get a clarity in what your own issue is. So you're able to know what the problem is, know what your problem is. And finally, when talking about it with someone else, says the Talmud, now you can get a third party who's unrelated to the issue, who has an entirely, perhaps you can say, you know, outside opinion and isn't emotionally attached to the issue at hand and can see the entirety of the issue and can give a much better view of what the problem is and what solutions and suggestions to go ahead, advice to go ahead and act upon to fix the problem at hand. And so that's what Rabbi Asi says regarding the verse in Proverbs when King Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, he says, when you have a worry in your hearts, Yashchena, says Rabbi Asi, that means King Solomon is telling us, speak it over with someone else, right? Which is literally classical psychology. Speak it over. Just the benefits of talking it, of sharing that feelings with someone else enables you to clarify it for yourself, for others, and enable to get an outside, unrelated emotional opinion, which can help you through your issue, which would be classical psychology. But that's not what I'm here to tell you. We're going to move along from that second opinion in the Talmud, and we're going to go back to the first opinion in the Talmud. The first opinion was Rabbi Ami. And Rabbi Ami says that the word Yashchena should be read similar, which is the same idea. Yashchina. What does Yashchina mean? To banish. Banish that thought. What does it mean, banish that thought? Don't think about it. You have a worry in your heart. Don't let it bog you down. Don't think about it. Don't concern yourself with it. Move forward. Now, what does that mean? And this is the opinion of the Rebbe that we're going to focus on tonight. Move your mind away from bothersome thoughts towards productive activities. This is what the Rebbe generally advised people to do. Now, again, disclaimer. You read through the letters of the Rebbe, thousands of letters addressing mental health topics, stories, letters, English, Hebrew, French, you name it. Multiple times the Rebbe sends people to mental health professionals. This needs to be a professional. There's professionals in this area. There's some specific psychologists, psychiatrists that the Rebbe would send people to, ones that the Rebbe knew personally. And in general, the Rebbe would say, just, go to a mental health professional. Obviously, it's important when the situation is serious to go and get it taken care of a mental health professional. What we're going to be discussing tonight, perhaps, are the issues that aren't perhaps that serious. We're not talking about clinical depression, for example. We're talking about when a person gets down during the day, when a person thinks about certain issues, as we'll see today. It's the perhaps smaller issues that haven't reached that level of clinical mental health issues, but rather the lower level mental health issues that perhaps concern most people throughout the average day. What to do with those concerns, and perhaps even some more serious situations, even together with going to seek mental health professional help. There's also the side to it, which is this Torah perspective of Rabbi Ami, which is putting the thoughts aside. And the idea really is digging into the core of the person and showing how the essential health at the core of the person is brought to the forefront. And you'll see what I mean as we get into it. To explain the Rebbe's vision and the Rebbe's really outlook when it comes to mental health, we're going to highlight four specific stories. Two of them are based on letters from the Rebbe, and two are videos that we will see. And based on these four stories, we'll have an understanding of the Rebbe's outlook when it comes to these areas in life. And I just want to explain once again that when it comes to letters from the Rebbe, by and large, we do not have the letters that were written to the Rebbe. Those were confidential. Those were only read by the Rebbe himself, and then they were usually destroyed by the Rebbe. We do not have those letters by and large. There are some that, for whatever reason, we do have, either because the sender kept that letter and shared it with others or similar. But by and large, we don't have the letters that were sent to the Rebbe. We only have the Rebbe's response, which the Rebbe directed to his secretariats to go ahead and print those responses for the benefit of the public, obviously omitting sensitive information. In many instances, we don't have the name of the receiver of the letter because it's a sensitive topic, and so it's not important for their name to be out there. And in some cases, other details of the letter, identifying details, were removed from the letters. But we do have thousands upon tens of thousands of letters in various languages that were shared and published by the Secretariat of the Rebbe, letters that were shared for the benefit of the public. And that's how we kind of glean the story from various letters. By seeing the response, we know what the writer had written to the Rebbe. So let's get right into the first case study, the first situation that we will analyze, where we will see the Rebbe's advice with regarding mental health. This first case is an individual. We do not know what he wrote to the Rebbe. He's an individual, but based from his letter, it seems that he had some sort of thoughts that were bothering him. What those thoughts were, we do not know, but bothersome thoughts, as well as he had painful emotions of guilt and regret over some sort of unbecoming behavior. We don't know what the behavior was. We don't know what the thoughts was, but these bothersome thoughts were plaguing him, and this painful emotions of guilt and regret over some unbecoming behavior. This is the letter that was written to the Rebbe in 1965, and the Rebbe responded as follows. Let's have a look in text 1a on page 92. This is a letter originally penned in English and sent by the Rebbe to this fellow in July of 1965. With regard to the thought which you expressed in your letter, I believe I have already written to you before that there are many problems and states of mind which are best dealt with by dismissing them from the mind completely, at any rate for a period of time. It is then possible to return to those problems with a fresh mind and in a more objective state, so as to evaluate the problems in their true perspective and reality, and it is then easier to find the proper solution. In the vast majority of such cases, the individual himself can decide how long this period of dismissal from attention should be, judging by the degree of objectivity which he can attain as time goes on. So this is the first part of the letter. What do we see from this letter? From this first part? First part is the Rebbe setting out his opinion. You have these bothersome thoughts. You have these feelings of guilt and regret. Don't dwell upon them. Don't even think about them. Remove them from your mind completely. Go on with your day. Go on with doing whatever things you have been doing. Don't think about these bothersome thoughts. Don't think about the guilt and regret that you're having. Not that they're not important, but right now for you to dwell on them are not beneficial. It's important to deal with them, but you deal with them at a time when your mind isn't occupied with them. You're not emotionally involved with them. You're able to address them from a place of greater objectivity. How long do you need? Leave it up to yourself. You know how long you need. A month, a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. Leave yourself out of it. Don't get involved in these details. Move it to the side. Dismiss them from your mind completely. Now, dismiss these thoughts from your mind. right? Tell someone, don't think about a pink elephant, right? What are you thinking about? A pink elephant. How do you turn off your mind? How do you say, tell someone, don't think about it? What's the Rebbe essentially telling this young fellow, this man? Don't think about these feelings of guilt and regret. Don't think about these bothersome thoughts, whatever they are, right? You're thinking about, I don't know, why you missed the day of wrapping tefillin. You think about why you said something you should have. Don't think about it. How do you tell someone not to think about it? You tell someone not to think about it. On the contrary, scientifically, they're going to think about it more. So that's where the Rebbe continues in text 1b, page 93. Needless to say, also, that it is not an easy thing to dismiss a problem from the mind, especially a matter that involves one's own self. This would be almost impossible unless one can engage one's thought and attention in a completely unrelated subject. For man's thinking process is constantly in a state of flux and has a tendency, consciously or subconsciously, to revert to the subject matter which one wishes to dismiss from the mind. Therefore, when resolving to dismiss the matter from one's mind, it is necessary immediately to find some other subject, unrelated to the first, in which to engage one's attention. Another point, which is also almost universally true, is that it is not easy for the person involved to find the proper subject in which to engage one's mind. But here it is possible to receive help from friends who would know you and your psychological makeup. Undoubtedly, you have such friends within reach. You have thoughts, don't think about them. You can't tell someone not to think about it, so you know what you should do? Your mind's going to wander constantly. Find a different, unrelated subject to think about. You're thinking about a pink elephant, so now actively don't say, I'm not going to think about the pink elephant. Actively try and think about a yellow refrigerator, right? So now you're giving your mind something else to be occupied with. So don't try to actively dismiss the matter from your mind. Try to actively engage in another unrelated subject. And if you find it troubling to do that, then go ahead and seek a friend's advice on what other subject to think about. So what's the Rebbe telling this individual? That's how you can think about something else. And the Rebbe continues. Text 1c, page 94. Same letter. Generally, there is a teaching of our sages that nothing stands in the way of repentance for the past and commitment for the future. Here, too, the principle enunciated above may be applied, namely, that although it is necessary to end the transgression immediately, whether it is a sin of commission or omission, it is also often necessary to end immediately any self-recrimination or brooding in regard to the sins of the past. One of the obvious reasons for this is that brooding over past failures is bound to be depressing and discouraging and would undermine one's confidence in the future, even one's confidence in the efficacy of teshuvah repentance. Therefore, it is advisable to dismiss such thoughts for the time being and leave them for more propitious times. May God grant that you should have good news to report in regard to all the above. What's this third point that the Rebbe is making? Same idea when it comes to teshuvah, when it comes to mitzvahs. Yeah, if we did something wrong in the past, we can dwell on what we've done wrong. And then what's the problem? We're reliving it again and again and again. Every time we think about what we've done wrong, it's almost like we're living with sin all over again. By reliving it, by regretting it, by feeling guilty about it, we're reliving it. And so we're living with sin the entire time. So instead of reliving it, trust in the mechanism that Judaism has given us, and that is teshuvah, repentance, right? Don't think about it. You missed something, don't think about it. How can I do such a thing? You did something wrong, don't think about it. In other words, yes, commit yourself not to do it again, but don't let it anchor you down to keep you in the past. Right? And say, Jackie Mason has his famous joke. He says, every Jew walks around the New York and has a building that he could have bought 30 years ago for $5. And why didn't he? Right? Now, that building, I could have bought it for $10 in 1960, and I didn't. And now look how much it's worth. And what's the idea? The idea is the guilt that's keeping us in the past. Don't have the guilt keeping us in the past. So what's the idea that the Rebbe is making in this letter? Focus on the here and now. The Rebbe is advising this young man. You have these bothersome thoughts that are entering your mind. You have this regret over past issues that you've done, over unbecoming behavior. Don't be consumed by the problem. Don't delve into the problem, deeply reflecting on your problem, on your past actions and current issues. Don't do it. Actively work to forget about it. Actively work to engage your mind in unrelated issues. And when you calm down and you're able to, from an objective perspective, then you can revisit it and analyze it and see what messages you can take for the past. But now, that's the past. Don't let it anchor you down. Don't discuss it. Don't focus on it. Don't think about it. Move along. Invest your energy in the present. Invest your energy in something else. This is the first case study. Second case study is a video. It's not a letter. And this video is about a woman. Her name was Mrs. Tybal Lipsker. Tybal Lipsker was a woman in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and she had terrible anxiety, as we'll soon see. Her grandson relating the story, and she wrote to the Rebbe how to deal with this anxiety. She has many children and grandchildren, great grandchildren, rabbis and rebbitzins throughout the entire world. Chances are you've met one of them. And she shares her her grandson shares fascinating insight that the Rebbe shared with his grandmother. So we'll share that video clip now.
My grandmother, Tybal Lipsker, was a very special and holy woman. Like many of our grandmothers, she did not enjoy a serene and easy, smooth life. Growing up in Bolshevik communist Russia as a Jew was difficult. Raising a family in Georgia during the 1930s under Stalin's tyranny was far from simple. Then came the war. They escaped the former Soviet Union on false papers, came to the displaced persons camps, the DP camps. Again, life was anything but serene, raising a large family, sometimes in one-bedroom flat. My grandparents made it in 1947 to the United States of America. They settled on a farm in New Jersey. That too didn't turn out so successful, and they relocated to Brooklyn, New York. My grandparents raised 9 beautiful, amazing children and a 10th orphan. Making a livelihood proved very complicated, and the upheavals of her life took their toll on her. She suffered from anxiety, from depression, from melancholy. And one day my grandmother consulted the Lubavitcher Rebbe what to do about her internal psychological and emotional state. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave her fascinating advice. He suggested to her that she go to as many Jewish weddings as possible and to dance away at these weddings and inspire other people to dance. As it happens to be, my grandmother was an exceptionally skilled dancer. She embraced the Rebbe's advice, and for decades, she would go to every possible wedding and dance away. Family, friends, relatives, community members, and sometimes complete strangers. Everybody knew Mrs. Lipsker is here. She is the life of the wedding and the life of the party. This was not part of her nature. This was quite contrary to her nature, but she did it, and she did it with every fiber of her being. She lived in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. There were many Bali Tshuva, young women and men who returned to Judaism, and they had small families attending the wedding, or sometimes no families. And my grandmother would come in, and she brought so much joy and vigor and stamina and inspiration to the wedding. She would dance away sometimes for hours with the bride and with the mothers and with the siblings and with the families and with the relatives. indeed, the joy that she brought to hundreds and thousands of people over long decades, it came back to her. It gave her so much joy and strength and fortitude and resilience and inspiration. Besides the fact, exercising a few times a week for a few hours a night, dancing with all your might is also very effective for anxiety.
So we see here that same idea where the Rebbe advised you, don't focus on your anxiety, on your traumatic past, on the dark situations that brought you to those feelings. Focus on doing something actionable, joy, happiness, and that will cause it to go away, which it did. Now, just to point out something fascinating, Mrs. Lipsker, as I mentioned, has many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, some of which are classmates of mine, friends of mine, and I only recently came across the story, and apparently some of the grandchildren did not know the story until recent. They always knew their grandmother dances at weddings. They didn't know that it was because the Rebbe had suggested that she do that. But these grandchildren of hers are also the star dancers at weddings. And it doesn't have to be weddings of family, weddings of friends. Any wedding, when there was a wedding in town and they were free to go, they were at that wedding. Now, in Crown Heights, right here in Los Angeles, maybe not as many, but in Crown Heights, there are multiple Jewish weddings, Hasidic weddings, every night. There's a few wedding halls, and in every single hall, it's usually jam-packed. There are weddings every single night. And so if one wants to, they can go wedding hopping every single night to multiple Hasidic weddings each night. And some of her grandchildren, great-grandchildren even, continue that till today. They go to every wedding they can, and they bring the joy. They dance. They're pretty good dancers, and they dance, and they bring that joy to themselves and to the people around. And so perhaps you can say that in this case, in other words, it's don't pass down the trauma, pass down the joy. And she definitely did that. She passed down this joy, not only for herself, but to her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and probably for many, many decades to come. So again, we see this idea of engage your energy in a completely unrelated area, entirely outside of your problems, and don't focus on the problems. Third case study is fascinating. See, this is a video, I believe it's from 1989, 1990, of an individual walking by the Rebbe to receive $1. And we've seen many of those videos from 1986. Every Sunday, the Rebbe would stand for hours on end, receiving anyone who wanted a blessing, some advice, men, women, children, Jews, non-Jews, world leaders, regular people, didn't matter who, was able to come by and receive a blessing from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would hand that individual $1. And the purpose was, as the Rebbe once explained, was that whenever two people meet, it should benefit a third. And so it was $1 to give to charity. So the Rebbe would give people $1 to give to charity, and together with that, people would come just to get their blessing or to request the Rebbe's advice on a certain issue. And so this is one of those people. A few years earlier, the Rebbe had founded an organization called the Aleph Institute. If you haven't heard about it, it's definitely an institute that you should search up online. It's a fascinating organization founded by the Rebbe in the mid-'80s. And the Aleph Institute has two areas of focus. It focuses on the military and the prisons. Now, those are perhaps two diverse institutes or two diverse areas of focus, but they have a shared area, and that is the families related to these individuals and the individuals themselves. These individuals themselves find themselves and very often distant from any established Jewish community, in search of more meaning in their lives, and their families are dealing with the distance from their loved ones and searching for more meaning in that distance. Obviously, two very different scenarios, but with a similar outcome. And so Aleph till today is one of the largest organizations that does that. It's a fascinating organization that has a branch out here in Los Angeles. The Aleph Institute, they have chaplains and care packages for soldiers and for families, and they deal with the health side of it, and they deal with the family side of it, and they deal with the inmates. They deal with the legal side of the inmates, and they help the religious side of the inmates. I went on behalf of Aleph to prisons to read the Megillah, for example, in Jewish prisons, for Jewish inmates housed in various prisons, and there are junior rabbis who travel around the world around the United States to various prisons to bring Judaism to these inmates during their time in need. And so this video that we'll see here, it's a short video. It's one video, but it's an individual who was in prison. And so the video is pixelated. We cannot see who it is. It's an individual who was in prison for whatever reason. And during his time behind bars, Aleph was very instrumental in helping him. And so he comes by to thank the Rebbe for the Aleph Institute's help for him, but also to ask the Rebbe for some guidance in his next step of life. And let's have a look on what the Rebbe tells this former prisoner.
I was in prison, and this rabbi here, and also the feeling of you helped me get through it.
God Almighty will soon forget about all this past.
I don't.
It's not the same. You know what Passover is?
Yes.
Yeah. If the Jews have forgotten about Mitzrayim, it is time for you to forget about your prison also. God Almighty bless you, even if it's difficult, but try your best. God Almighty bless you.
Thank you.
Now, this video is perhaps quite perplexing, right? Here's an individual who went through prison, right? Definitely not a pleasant experience, and perhaps one that no one can ever forget. And yet the Rebbe tells him that for his next stage in life, he should forget his prison experience. What's the Rebbe telling him? The Rebbe says, we forgot about Egypt, you should forget about prison. We forgot about Egypt? Really? I mean, we talk about Egypt every single day, how we were slaves in Egypt and God redeemed us, and then we sit for an entire night to pass our Seder. One night's not enough, 2 nights, hours on end talking about Egypt. We say it in prayer multiple times every single day. What does the Rebbe mean when the Rebbe tells this former inmate that we forgot about Egypt? We didn't forget about Egypt. We learn our lessons from Egypt and what it has to teach us, but we forgot about the feelings of being enslaved in Egypt. We're no longer in Egypt. In other words, when one has a negative experience, there's 2 ways to interact with that experience or to commemorate perhaps that experience. One is to be stuck in the past and to relive that experience day in, day out, which is detrimental to one's health, terribly so. And one is to say, you know what? I'm moving past it. Obviously, it's part of who I am. Obviously, there are messages that I took from that experience, but it's not who I am. I've moved past it. When it comes to Egypt, we have a double commandment. On the one hand, we have a commandment to talk about our experiences in Egypt. On the other hand, we have this very perplexing commandment. And perhaps many of us don't even know that it exists. One of the 613 commandments is, Loi sesaiv mitzri ki ger ha'yisa b'yarza. You shall not detest, do not hate an Egyptian because you were a guest in his land. Don't hate an Egyptian? You mean don't hate? He enslaved us. Now, don't hate doesn't mean forget what they did to you. It doesn't mean don't seek justice for what they've done to you. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that we have to forgive the Egyptian. It means don't let the Egyptian live rent-free in your heart and your mind. If you hate the Egyptian, if you have a grudge against the Egyptian, then you're reliving that enslavement day in, day out. That Egyptian is living rent-free in your heart and in your mind. Move along, move past it. What the Rebbe is telling this individual, this former prisoner, is don't live in prison and don't let the prison live in you. Move on. You have a broad horizon beyond you. You have a full life ahead of you with so many good things that can be accomplished. Don't live behind in the prison. Choose not to be stuck. Choose to move forward. Once again, this similar idea of disengage from the past in order to heal from it. And that's what we do with Egypt. We disengage from it. We glean messages from it from an objective. We choose how to frame it. It will not choose how we frame it. We will choose how to frame it. And we choose not to be stuck and to move on forward. And finally, our fourth case study from today is an interesting story and perhaps the most succinct psychological letter from the Rebbe. Once again, we don't really know the story behind the letter, but we could glean some details from the letter itself, from the Rebbe's response. A mother had written to the Rebbe about her two daughters. Now, we know that it was a mother and not the father, even though we don't know the name of we don't know the addressee, because there are two ways that you can know it. First of all, in the Rebbe's introduction, the Rebbe would always, when writing a letter, the Rebbe will write the place, the location, the date, dear so-and-so, greetings and blessings. Every single letter, or at least that I've seen, always begins with that statement, greetings and blessings. For a woman, it would begin blessings and greetings. Now, beyond the scope of this class on why there was that difference, but suffice it to say there was that difference. And so just by looking at that introductory statement, we know if it was addressed to a woman or a man. If it was addressed to a man, it would say greetings and blessings. If it was addressed to a woman, it would say blessings and greetings. As well as the Hebrew letters, there's a big difference. In Hebrew, the way you write words in the masculine versus in the feminine. And so we know from the letters what was written to a man and what was written to a woman. And so this letter, we know the letter begins with blessings and greetings. So it was written to the mother, and she writes about her two daughters, and she is having an issue. What is the issue that the mother is having? She had seemingly sent her younger daughter to a therapist who was advising the mother on the situation. And the mother was very concerned about the younger daughter's situation. Let's have a look at the letter, and then we'll get to what the story is. This is on page 95, text 2a. The letter is 2a and 2b. We'll first do 2a, and then we'll continue along. Page 95. The reasons for your younger daughter's condition are not at all complicated. The causes seem to lie in the fact that your daughter is subconsciously jealous of her older sister. And such a feeling manifests itself by a desire not to be interested in those activities where the person is unable to compete successfully. Therefore, your younger daughter shows little inclination to engage in the activities in which her sister is more successful than she. However, since such is the attitude of jealousy, creating a subconscious feeling of guilt, one is prone to compensate for it by an outward show of attachment. That is why she flies to the defense of her sister if anyone should say anything disparaging against her. So what happened was the mother had written to the Rebbe that she has two daughters, one older, one younger. The older seems to be, run-of-the-mill girl, and the younger daughter is really uninterested in any of the activities or studies or whatever it was, we don't know, but say studies at school or games or after school activities, whatever it was, as well as she seems to be extremely overprotective of her older sister. And these were quite concerning to the mother. And the Rebbe is making a few points. The first point the Rebbe makes in this first part of the letter is a comforting point. Don't worry. They're not complicated. You may seem they're complicated and it's very hard to deal with and it's very hard to figure out, which can panic a mother and concern a mother deeply. Says the Rebbe, first thing, don't panic. Your daughter is going through something painful, but it's understandable. And it's an understandable experience. And if it's an understandable experience, it can be dealt with. And then the Rebbe explains the root cause of the issue. The root cause of the issue is the younger daughter is not excelling in any of the areas where the older daughter is excelling, which automatically creates jealousy. Because it's creating jealousy, it's causing the younger daughter to withdraw from the areas in which her older sister is excelling in. But because she's feeling jealous about her sister, her negative feeling towards her sister automatically is creating this guilt, which she's trying to soothe by always standing by her sister's side. In other words, she knows that she's having these, either consciously or subconsciously, she knows that she's having these negative feelings towards her sister. And so she's kind of, overcompensating by always standing by her sister's side. Now that we understand the story of what's going on, let's continue the letter from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe advises what to do. Text 2b, page 96, the Rebbe continues this letter to the mother. At the same time, this diagnosis suggests also the method of therapy. What is that? Namely, that every effort should be made to restore her confidence by offering her opportunities to engage in such activities where she can take a leading part and excel herself. Needless to say, this should be done in a gradual way, for in her present state of mind, she would be reluctant to undertake responsibilities all at once. But surely, both at school and in other cultural circles, there are opportunities for her to develop her artistic and other talents. It would be psychologically beneficial to her if the activities would be of a kind in which her sister does not participate. The choice of such activities is fairly wide, and they should be cultural, charitable, or youth work among Jewish youth and the like. In this fascinating letter, we see the Rebbe's approach once again. Here's the underlying issue, says the Rebbe. Don't attack the issue itself. Don't speak to the daughters and tell them what the issue is. Don't go there. Find something that your younger daughter can excel in on her own. And together with that, it should also be another activity, should be charitable, charitable youth work amongst Jewish work. In other words, move away from the elephant in the room. Move away from discussions about the problem. Move to an area entirely unrelated to the older sister, areas where her own health and her self-esteem can grow on its own terms. And this is the best way where the relationship between sisters will be repaired and will be rebuilt, and where the younger one's mental state will be repaired. Not by addressing the situation head on, but by moving away from the problem and focusing on a different area to strengthen the younger sister. That will fix all problems involved. These are 4 case studies, right? We had the first case study of the fellow who was having bothersome thoughts and regret and guilt over unbecoming behavior. We had the case study of the elderly Mrs. Lipsker, who was having anxiety, and the Rebbe suggested she go and dance at weddings. We had the case of the prisoner, former prisoner, and now we have this 4th case of the 2 daughters. But what we see over all these 4 cases is the idea where the Rebbe advises, don't focus on talking about the problem. Don't focus on the issue. Leave the issue in the past. Move on to something entirely unrelated. Move on from it. Do something productive. Do something beneficial to others. Do something outside of entirely unrelated to the problem itself. And that'll help the problem. Where does this idea come from? It's not from, the Rebbe didn't take it out of the hat, so to speak. This idea comes from the core belief of Torah that Torah has in every single individual. The idea that at the core of every individual is this wealth, pun intended, wealth of health. At the core is something good, right? Take, for example, if you have a diamond in the sand, right? And you're searching for the diamond in the sand. Are you going to focus on the sand that's surrounding the diamond, or are you going to search for the diamond, find the diamond to reveal it, and then the sand falls on the wayside, right? You're going to pick up the diamond and the sand falls on the wayside. You're not going to spend time focusing on the sand, on the dust that's surrounding the diamond. Says the Rebbe, find that wealth, that wellspring of health that's at the core of each individual, that wellspring of goodness, that wellspring of purity, that wellspring of mental health, emotional health that is at the core of every person. Reveal it within them by focusing on doing things that are unrelated. And when you do that, you're revealing that as essential good, that essential healthy core, and then the sand falls on the wayside. The problems will fall away on their own. Again, obviously, there are many situations, and the Rebbe as well, and many, many letters sends people to professional medical health, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. But by and large, especially when it comes to perhaps smaller areas or areas that haven't reached that clinical level, the idea is focus on forging ahead forward, on doing something entirely unrelated, something powerful, something good, and the other things will fall on the wayside based on the Jewish and Hasidic wisdom, and that is that there's an essential core of goodness. And this idea we see in two very powerful letters in text 3 and text 4. We'll read through the letters. They're a little bit on the longer side, but they're very important letters. The first letter of text 3 is a letter that was written to a mental health professional. Again, from the letter, we know who it was written to. From the details, it was written to a female mental health professional who sought the Rebbe's advice on some area of mental health. We don't know what her question was, but we do know that it was a female mental health professional, and this letter is from 1986. Let's have a look in text 3, page 98, in the English. It's a letter that was originally written in Hebrew, and it's translated here. It is difficult to offer counsel from afar, as the conditions of the country, the family, and so on have a direct bearing on the situation. Those who observe a situation from close proximity are better and more expertly equipped to arrive at an effective treatment. However, since you have already written to me and everything is by divine providence, I wish to emphasize something that I have witnessed in the majority of similar cases. A decisive and extremely effective method, which, to my amazement, is not used, at least not as much as it should be used, is, here's the key word, hesech hadas, guiding the patient to entirely remove their mind from actively dwelling on the problematic issues at hand. It's much more concise in the Hebrew. The more the patient succeeds in ceasing to think about and dwell upon those issues that are the cause of their problems, the greater will be the ability of their natural, here's the key, their natural internal healing powers, along with their other positive and curative aspects, to function with increased intensity and bring about healing. The above may be accomplished through arranging that these individuals are preoccupied with activities that lead to personal fulfillment, such as doing someone else a favor, something that in any case is acceptable to all and therefore should not be difficult to convince them to do. This is particularly so nowadays when instability is so prevalent and individual needs are so numerous. It is relatively simple to find a way for these individuals to help others with activities that are consonant with the needs and nature of the locale and of the individual who requires healing. What do we see from here? The idea is that there's divine inner health that lies at the core of every person. And so if we engage our mind in a healthy place, that will bring this divine inner health. In the words of the Rebbe, the natural internal healing powers and the other positive and curative aspects within ourselves, it'll bring it to the forefront. And the other things will fall on the wayside. And a second letter on this similar idea, text 4, page 100. I failed to see any grounds for your dejection and for your statement that everything has suddenly fallen apart. This letter seems to be written to a young woman, perhaps a teenager who was going through quite a volatile period of self-doubt, toxic introspection, and having lots of highly problematic and dramatic thoughts about herself, and seems to have also considered dropping out of school. And so the Rebbe's addressing her. I believe there was a correspondence, an ongoing correspondence. It isn't the only letter to this individual, but it's an ongoing correspondence. And the Rebbe says as follows: I failed to see any grounds for your dejection and for your statement that everything has suddenly fallen apart. Since your anxiety is unfounded, it will not last long, started today and gone tomorrow. That is, provided you do not actively invite morose thoughts that run contrary to human nature and the dictates of our Torah of life, which requires from each of us to serve Hashem specifically with joy. In truth, this service is possible and necessary at each moment of mortal life. You surely recognize, backed also with personal experience, the verily observable reality that if it is sometimes difficult to battle a certain mood, the best advice is to distract your attention from the mood, not by fighting it, but by focusing your thoughts elsewhere. The general motto for this approach is the verse in Ecclesiastes. What does the verse say? God made a person straightforward, but God made humans straightforward, but they sought many complications. Since the complications come from the people, therefore they have the ability to nullify them easily. I will conclude with my advice, since you sought my counsel. Completely divert your mind from all introspective, self-examining thoughts. Proceed with confidence along your life's path, since God's providence accompanies each of us at each step of our lives, not only regarding matters that we consider highly important, but in every detail of our lives. And we have another video on this topic before we get to the final point of tonight's class. Oops. There we go. Just a minute.
Professor Ruvain Feuerstein is a world-renowned Israeli clinical and developmental cognitive psychologist, founder and director of the International Center for the Enhancement of Learning Potential. His applied systems are being implemented in over 80 countries across the globe.
The rabbi referred to me children for their problems of development, some epileptic children, some Down syndrome children, and wherever I came, and wherever I visited or I worked in my field, people were addressing themselves to me. The rabbi wants you to see our child. And some of them received really letters from the rabbi, or the word from the rabbi, that I should see their child. And one of the things, and I must say, they believe that such a thing is possible, that people with genetic disorders, chromosomal disorders, can be turned into high functioning, normal functioning, and very close to study, to Yiddishkeit, etc. I had it very much from the rabbi. So it was a daring thing, because at this time, people didn't believe it's possible. One particular case, which I cannot disclose, and therefore it came from a country in Europe. This boy was considered to be mentally defective. One didn't believe that he will ever be able to function and to be independent and to be. And this man, the father, in some way he was not a very religious person, came to the rabbi. The rabbi told them to bring his son to me. The son came here and was placed in a family. He learned to read. He was sitting here near this door on a chair with a Tehillim. The rabbi said to finish Tehillim each week. And he learned this. It was the third year that he was with us. And he learned this. And Baruch Hashem, this went very well. And we were already feeling that we have done what the rabbi told us to do and empowered us to do, and we felt Atzlacha. Then things happened, and this young man went into the greatest danger. Not only drugs, but things which I cannot tell you. He ran away, and he came into a place from where very few people came out. And I then addressed myself to the rabbi. The rabbi said, don't leave him off your hand. Continue. And he gave me even a suggestion to send somebody to take him out from this place. I have never believed it will be possible. But the rabbi said, I've sent somebody. We took out this young man from this terrible, terrible, promiscuous drug people. With all, there's no Avirah Sheba'olam which he was not involved with. He came back. I want you to know, he is now the father of 4 children. Many of them, 2 of them, learning in yeshiva. And they are the only children of this family, only grandchildren of this family, which the grandparents can be proud of. I as a psychologist, and one says a good psychologist, could never believe that with my own knowledge and my own psychology, I would have ever been able to do it. Usually, in such cases, we raise our hands, nothing to do. Not with the rabbi. I must tell you something. Psychology, as it is taught, is very limited. Our understanding of the other is very much affected and related to our understanding of ourselves. In the way the rabbi understood the condition of the individual, in the way he claimed and suggested and felt empowered to say, yes, do it, there was a very different way of seeing the human being. Not as a just reflection of yourself, but as something which comes be'ara dilela.
We'll conclude with one point, and that is that perhaps understanding this, I wouldn't say exhaustive, but overarching or general view of the Rebbe of the goodness and the natural healing powers that people have from within, and to focus on the positive, moving away from the problem, is perhaps why the Rebbe felt a certain affinity of Dr. Viktor Frankl and his logotherapy. See, Dr. Frankl, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before, was a friend, a colleague, and student of Sigmund Freud, who both of these are Jewish, who was the father of psychoanalysis, was modern psychology, and had one view. And Viktor Frankl had an entirely different view, which really was born out of his experiences in the Holocaust. He lost his immediate family, his wife, his pregnant wife. I believe he lost a child, and his brother, his pregnant wife, not a child. His parents, his brother, his pregnant wife, were all murdered in the Holocaust. And nonetheless, he never wavered in his belief in human dignity and the human being's ability to transcend even the most horrific circumstances and surroundings. And just to quote one instance from his book itself, Man's Search for Meaning, let's have a look at text 5, page 102. I'm reminded of the American doctor who once turned up in my office in Vienna and asked me, "What school do you stand for?" I answered, "It is my own theory. It is called logotherapy." "Can you tell me in one sentence what is meant by logotherapy?" he asked. "At least what is the difference between psychoanalysis and logotherapy?" "Yes," I said, "but in the first place, can you tell me in one sentence what you think the essence of psychoanalysis is?" This was his answer. "During psychoanalysis, the patient must lie down on a couch and tell you things which sometimes are very disagreeable to tell." Whereupon I immediately retorted with the following improvisation. "Now, in logotherapy, the patient may remain sitting erect, but he must hear things which sometimes are very disagreeable to hear." Of course, this was meant facetiously and not as a capsule version of logotherapy. However, and here's the point, there is something in it, in as much as logotherapy, in comparison with psychoanalysis, is a method less retrospective and less introspective. Logotherapy focused rather on the future, that is to say, on the meanings to be fulfilled by the patient in his future. Logotherapy indeed is a meaning-centered psychotherapy. At the same time, logotherapy defocuses all the vicious circle formations and feedback mechanisms which play such a great role in the development of neurosis. Thus, the typical self-centeredness of the neurotic is broken up instead of being continually fostered and reinforced. See, so we can see some similarities between the Rebbe's approach and Viktor Frankl's approach, which makes the following video, and the final will conclude with this video. I know we're going a couple minutes over time, but it's a fascinating video of the Rebbe's personal relationship with Dr. Viktor Frankl, as shared by the Rebbe's emissary in Vienna, which is where Dr. Viktor Frankl lived.
Rabbi Yaakov Biderman is the director of Chabad Lubavitch in Austria. Shortly after he arrived in Vienna in 1981, he began to receive annual contributions from Dr. Viktor Frankl, the pioneering psychiatrist and founder of logotherapy.
התעלומה הזו, שפרופסור פרנקל מצא לנכון לתרום דווקא לחב"ד, לארגון דתי, לארגון שעוסק בהפצת היהדות, למרות שהוא עצמו בשום צורה לא הזדהה כאדם ששייך, נפטרה לנו הרבה שנים אחר כך, רק בשנת תשנ"ה. איש ביטחון מודיע לי שישנה אישה מבוגרת שמעוניינת לפגוש אותי, ואני אמרתי לו שיכניס אותה. והיא התחילה במילים האלו, היא אמרה לי, קוראים לי מרגרטה חייס. אם אתה חושב שאתם השלוחים הראשונים של הרבי לאוסטריה, יש לי בשבילך הפתעה. אני הייתי השליחה הראשונה של הרבי לאוסטריה. הייתי די המום, והיא ממשיכה לספר. היא קיבלה הזמנה לפגישה ביחידות עם הרבי. ובאותה הזדמנות אני סיפרתי לרבי שמפעם לפעם אני חוזרת לאוסטריה. ובסיום אותו מפגש, באותה יחידות, הרבי ביקש ממנה שבפעם הבאה שהיא נוסעת לאוסטריה, הוא היה רוצה שהיא תיצור קשר עם המזכירות של הרבי. הוא רוצה לבקש ממנה שתמלא משימה מסוימת. היא אומרת, רק כמה חודשים אחר כך התכוננתי לחזור לאוסטריה. אמרו לי בשמו של הרבי שכשאני מגיעה לווינאי, שאני אצור קשר עם פרופסור ויקטור פרנקל, ושאמסור לו בשם הרבי, שלא יתייאש ושלא יבוש מפני המלהיגים, ושימשיך בדרכו וימשיך בהפצת משנתו, שיתחזק, והרבי מברך אותו שהשם יצליחו והוא יזכה לפריצת דרך. דוקטור ויקטור פרנקל היה פסיכיאטר עמית של זיגמונד פרויד לפני השואה בווינה. אחרי שהוא היה במחנות ריכוז וחווה מצבים יוצאי דופן, הגיע למסקנה הפוכה. הוא אמר, האדם ביסודו הוא מחפש תכלית ותוכן לחייו, ולכן הוא האמין שרפואת הנפש מאוד קשורה יותר עם הענקת תוכן ואמונה, ערכים לבן אדם. הוא עמד בראש מרפאה חשובה, והוא גם היה מרצה באוניברסיטה, והשתתפו רבים בהרצאותיו, אבל יחד עם זאת, הוא היה מושא ללעג ולקלס, כי האסכולה הפסיכואנליטית של פרויד שלטה בכיפה, והיו מפריעים לו אפילו באמצע הרצאות. הוא היה עד כדי כך פגוע שהוא באותם ימים, כשמרגרטה חייס חיפשה אותו במרפאה, אמרו לה שהוא כבר תקופה לא הופיע. היא הגיעה אליו הביתה. נקשה בדלת ללא כל הודעה, כי לא היה לה אפשרות להודיע לפני כן. והיא תיארה שכשהיא נכנסת לבית, כשהיא פותחת הדלת, פותחת לה אישה, שלא נראית יהודייה. היא יכלה אפילו להבחין שהיה תלוי צלב בתוך הבית. היא הייתה בטוחה שזה מאוד מוזר שהרבי שולח אותה לעודד מישהו שגר בבית כזה. אבל בכל אופן היא עזרה אומץ והיא שאלה אם אפשר לראות בבקשה את דוקטור פרנקל, ואז הוא הופיע בפתח הבית, והוא שאל אותם מה הגברת רוצה, והיא ענתה לו שיש לה בשבילו מסר מרבי שניארסון מברוקלין, ניו יורק. ואז היא אומרת לו, הרב שניארסון ביקש ממני למסור לך שלא תתייאש, שתתחזק, אל תבוש מפני אלו שמלהיגים, סופך להצליח ותזכה לפריצת דרך. בערך אלו, זה היה תוכן הדברים שהיא מסרה לו. היא אומרת, ההתרגשות שלו הייתה משהו שהיא מעולם לא חוותה אצל אדם מבוגר ועוד אצל אישיות כזו. הוא פשוט פרץ בבכי תמרורים. ואחר כך לקח לו זמן עד שהוא יכל לדבר, והוא הראה לניירות שהיו לו על השולחן. אלו היו ניירות תפסי הגירה לאוסטרליה. הוא היה כל כך מדוכא מהיחס אליו, שהוא החליט לעזוב את וינה. ועכשיו, כשהוא קיבל את המסר הזה ממנה, המסר שהרבי העביר אליו, הוא אמר לה, אני אתחזק. אני חוזר לעבודה ואני אמשיך. הוא התחיל בצורה מאוד בטוחה להטיף את משנתו. הספר שלו, האדם מחפש משמעות, Man's Search for Meaning, תורגם ליותר מ-12 שפות. הספר הופץ בלמעלה מ10 מיליון עותקים. אני רציתי לאשש את הסיפור הזה, אחרי שהיא סיפרה לי את זה, אני ביקשתי להתקבל לפגישה אצל פרופסור פרנקל. הוא כבר אז היה די מבוגר, למעלה מגיל 90, אני התקשרתי אליו ושאלתי אם אוכל להתקבל אליו לפגישה. הוא אישית ענה בטלפון בבית, הוא אמר לי שהוא חלש מדי והוא לא יכול להיפגש. הוא גם היה קצת קצר רוח, הוא לא היה במיטבו. אז בכל זאת, בטלפון, שאלתי אותו, אם השם, הרבי מלובביץ', הרב שניאורסון, אומר לו משהו, רציתי פשוט לבדוק את הנתונים, גם איתו אישית. ברגע שהוא שמע את שמו של הרבי, אז נימת הקול השתנתה לגמרי. הוא פתאום נהיה מאוד סבלני. הוא אמר, ודאי ששמו של הרבי מלובביץ' אומר לי הרבה. אני חייב לו המון. Ich schulde ihm sehr viel, הוא אמר לי בגרמנית. הוא הוסיף ואמר, ich schätze den Rabbi sehr. hat mich in einen sehr kritischen Moment geholfen. ברגע מאוד קריטי הוא עזר לי. אני חייב לו רבות.
So perhaps it's interesting to note that relationship, and perhaps it stems from this idea that it aligns very strongly with the Rebbe's advice that the Rebbe always gave people, taken from the Torah, the idea of focusing on something else. And so perhaps what we have from tonight is that the key to emotional peace is to direct our energy and attention to finding meaning and purpose, redirect it away from the problem towards the solution. Focus on what's good, focus on what's positive, focus on the core natural ability to rehabilitate and healing, and everything else will fall on the wayside.